Edison inventa el kinetoscopio. 1895, los hermanos Lumière hacen la primera función de cine. 1905, abren la primera sala de cine en Pittsburgh. En 1911 se estrena el primer largometraje. 1941, El Ciudadano Kane. Para 1960 llega Psicosis. En el 77, Star Wars. 1994, Spielberg se gana el Oscar. Titanic en el 98. 2001, El Señor de los Anillos. 2006, Disney compra Pixar. Luego los superhéroes. Después Netflix, la pandemia. Ya no visitas a tu abuela.
El cine se fue a la mierda.
Muy buenas tardes, muy buenas noches, muy buenos días, sean muy bienvenidos a este su bonito podcast familiar. El cine se fue a la mierda en su edición número 76. Es una ocasión muy especial, porque no crean que Alan se hizo viejo para nada. Más bien tenemos un gran invitado y tenemos el gran honor de presentar al veterano de animación, Fraser McLean. Welcome, Fraser. Thank you for being here.
Gracias por invitarme.
De
Un
nada,
gran placer
estar
aquí con
it's a
ustedes.
honor to have you here. ¿Y cómo estás, Fraser? How are you? How are you today?
Muy bien, gracias. Muy bien. Y disculpe, después de 4 años mi español es todavía muy limitado y lucho con la gramática. Entonces, gracias por invitarme y por traducir todo eso. Gracias.
Perfecto. Sí, bueno, a mí me suena muy bien tu español, la verdad. Y bueno, Fraser está aquí para ayudarnos a hablar sobre animación, precisamente. Él es un veterano de la animación, ha trabajado en películas como Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Space Jam, Tarzán, entre otras. Y pues nos gustaría que Fraser pues nos platicara un poquito de su historia, de cómo empezó su carrera como animador desde niño, etcétera. Entonces vamos a preguntar eso, les acabo de decir, que empiece un poquito con su infancia. So Fraser, how was your childhood? Like, why? I mean, what in your childhood made you wanna become an animator, or being in this industry? How did little Fraser start with that?
Well, I was really lucky. My father was a journalist. My mother was a teacher, and neither one of them was freaked out by the idea that I was interested in art. So from a very early age, they bought me colored pencils and paper and paints and stuff, and they encouraged me to do creative artistic things. And that was very unusual in the 1960s in Scotland, particularly to encourage a boy to do something artistic, because it was still very kind of, gender specific roles and all that kind of stuff. So I was lucky that I had a lot of encouragement at home, and we watched a lot of animation on television, but we watched animation in black and white on television till I was 14. So one of the big experiences for me was seeing Fantasia in a cinema in color when I was about 8 years old, and that changed.
Yeah, Fantasia's is the 50s or later 40s, I think. Fantasia.
Well, Fantasia's release was delayed by World War II in certain parts of the world.
Okay.
And my mother and father got married in 1951, and Edinburgh in Scotland, the capital, has a big arts festival every year, and there was huge enthusiasm and excitement about the fact that Fantasia was being screened as part of the Edinburgh International Festival in 1951, I think, because a lot of people outside the United States had not seen it. And my mother never forgot the experience, and she was steeped in classical music. She was trained as a classical singer, and she could identify any piece of classical music in the first bar on the radio. And she had, all through my childhood up to that point, had described Fantasia to me. And then when we went into this cinema, my 2 older brothers didn't want to go. They weren't interested. And my father was busy. So my mom took me on my own. And it was a rainy, grey Saturday afternoon in Scotland. And man, when I came out of the cinema, everything looked and sounded and smelled different. It was like having a switch thrown on your senses. But it wasn't, to answer your question, it didn't make me think, oh, I want to work in animation, because the idea of being involved in animation was
Wasn't
so
even crossing your mind, probably, right? Like,
no,
yeah, I
no,
bet. I
because there
want to
was no
translate a little
animation.
bit
Yeah, go ahead.
what you have
Sorry,
said so far.
long answer.
Le pregunté a Fraser desde pequeño que cómo creció, qué fue lo que pasó, que hizo que se interesara en la animación, y él lo que me está explicando es que tuvo mucha suerte porque sus padres, bueno, su madre estaba entrenada en canto, es una cantante, y también sus padres estaban envueltos en periodismo. Entonces realmente eran gente muy abierta para la época, porque en los 60s en Escocia todavía la gente era muy cerrada en cuanto a los trabajos, etcétera, pero sus papás le daban crayones y lápices de colores y libros para colorar y dibujar y cuadernos. Entonces lo llenaban de esas cosas que a él pues le permitían desarrollar su creatividad. Y nos cuenta que una de las experiencias que más recuerda fue ir a ver Fantasía, la película de Disney de fantasía, es que bueno, es muy popular. Se retrasó esta película, su salida por la Segunda Guerra Mundial, y él, Fraser, la vio pues en los 50s. Entonces dice que él salió del cine viendo el mundo de una forma ya muy distinta y viendo la música muy distinta, pero aún así, pues todavía él ni siquiera se le ocurría por la mente trabajar en animación, ni estar involucrado en eso, ¿no? So when was that? When
I
after
saw well
Fantasia, what
my
happened?
mom saw Fantasia in 1951 and held the memory of it so clearly, and I would have seen it probably in 1968, 69 when it was re-released. And you know, for nearly 20 years, she just had this movie running in her head that she'd seen. And when I saw
And the music is
animation on
amazing.
television, oh, the music's and actually, a lot of people are not aware of this. If you've got a different signal in your left and right audiophonos, you have Disney and RCA to thank, because stereo sound was invented for Fantasia. They invented a whole new sound
Oh,
system called Fantasound, which was a 36-channel recording and replay system, which required special equipment to be installed in a limited number of cinemas. And it was too expensive. So very, very few people in the world ever got to see the full Fantasound version of Fantasia. But they released a stereo version for the first time in the 1960s. And Disney even released a special psychedelic poster, not actively encouraging people to go and watch it under the influence of recreational drugs, but tapping into the whole Yellow Submarine thing with the Beatles and psychedelia. So the late 60s release that I would have seen as a child was in a different kind of cultural context. But, you know, it was a black and white world on television. And in Scotland, the weather is black and white, like Scotland is black and white. So, you know, that experience of being in a cinema and seeing animation, but seeing Disney animation in color was extraordinary, just life-changing completely.
nos acaba de Fraser dar un dato curioso que nos dice que esa tecnología que tenemos hoy, donde puedes escuchar una cosa en el audífono derecho y otra en el izquierdo, fue inventada precisamente para la película de fantasía de Disney. Entonces, él nos está diciendo que pues fue una experiencia inigualable, porque su mundo de la televisión, de las caricaturas, era en blanco y negro, nada más, y de repente vio fantasía a color. Y también nos dijo que Escocia en ese entonces pues era blanco y negro, es un país lluvioso, frío, que se oscurece muy rápido, entonces era todo en blanco y negro. Entonces dice que para él fue algo increíble poder ver fantasía pues a todo color. So yeah, and how about, like, after Fantasia, you were already a fan of animation. So what made you like?
So the other thing, to put this in perspective, we only had 3 television channels in Scotland in the 1960s. We didn't have a 4th television channel until 1982. So the year before I graduated. And when we were coming home from school, the BBC would show Don Gatto or the Flintstones or all the Hanna-Barbera stuff. That was timed for all the children coming in from school. On a Tuesday evening, they had a double bill of Tom and Jerry. And my dad was a huge Tom and Jerry fan. He just, he worked a lot at home and he would interrupt his evening's work to come and sit and laugh like a drain at Tom and Jerry. And then I don't know quite how to, you're going to have to trust me that I'm telling the truth here. But the only time we saw Disney quality animation on television was at Christmas and Easter and summer holidays. There were special TV shows that were adapted from the American shows, the Disney shows in the States. And, local British or French or Italian, throughout Europe, comedians or pop stars would come on and introduce 3 minutes of Peter Pan, 3 minutes of Jungle Book, and then a longer bit of Robin Hood or whatever the movie was that was being released that year. And we didn't have VHS tapes, we didn't have streaming, we didn't have downloading. So when these programs were broadcast, you had to be in your house with your family in front of the television waiting for it. And when the Disney specials were announced for the holidays, people would take a pen and mark round it in the television listings. And on the day, as the program was starting, if you went out onto the street was empty. The entire world stopped to watch Disney because it was the only thing in the world that looked like that. It was the only animation that was at that level. So it was like what happens when the World Cup is on. Like everybody is watching the World Cup or everybody is watching Wimbledon. And it's difficult to get students to appreciate that was the impact that the Disney quality animation had. And even as a child, I could look at, Barney Rubble taking food out of the fridge in the Flintstones, and they would move him around with like 4 or 5 drawings shot on 2s. And then you would see a little clip of Bambi or something else, and it was just on another level. It was like a Renaissance painting coming to life. And that had an impact on people that was universal. It wasn't just, people that were interested in art or interested in cinema. It was this completely like World Cup football level, just everyone had to be in front of their televisions watching that program to see the Disney animation. Because the only time features went into the cinema, there was a kind of 4-year re-release for the older Disney movies. So you could wait like 15 years before you could see 101 Dalmatians or Sword in the Stone or Sleeping Beauty, because they only came round into the cinemas very rarely. So Disney had that impact, not just on me, but on everybody.
That's so crazy. Fraser nos está diciendo aquí que cuando él era pequeño, en Escocia, solo había 3 canales de televisión, nada más. Y las únicas caricaturas que los niños veían, pues era lo de Hanna-Barbera, como Tom y Jerry, Los Picapiedra, Don Gato. Ese tipo de cosas eran lo que ellos veían. Y que esas caricaturas estaban planeadas para que justo cuando los niños llegaran a sus casas de la escuela, pudieran verlas en la televisión, y que muy rara vez, como 3 veces al año más o menos, aparecían cosas de Disney en la televisión. Aparecían a veces solo pedacitos del Libro de la Selva o de La Espada en la Piedra o de Robin Hood o de Bambi, y a veces pasaban las películas enteras y a veces llegaban a los cines de Escocia, pero muy, muy rara vez. Entonces nos dice que cuando iban a pasar cosas de Disney en la televisión, lo anunciaban con anticipación, entonces la gente marcaba en sus calendarios o en papel cuándo iba a estar. Y tú tenías que estar enfrente de la televisión, no había streaming, no había nada de eso donde tú podías elegir cuándo lo veías, ni cablevisión, ni VHS. Entonces, cuando lo iban a pasar, tú tenías que estar ahí, así como en el Mundial de Fútbol, que cuando va a jugar tal partido, la calle se vacía y todos están enfrente de la televisión. Era algo así con cosas de Disney, porque sí era mucha la diferencia en ese entonces de la calidad que tenían los shows de Hanna-Barbera comparados con los shows, con las películas de Disney, ¿no? Que era una calidad, o sea, dice Fraser que es como una pintura renacentista volviendo a la vida, ¿no? Entonces, eso es bastante interesante. Y aquí Andrés Ortiz dice: hola chicos, si me van a hablar en inglés, pongan subtítulos. No hay subtítulos, Andrés, pero voy a estar traduciendo. Y dice: interesante cómo el invitado ingresó al mundo de la animación. Y es difícil hacerlo. Para allá vamos. Fraser nos está contando su historia desde pequeñito, pero para allá vamos. En un momento nos va a contar eso. No sé si tú quieras decirle algo a Fraser antes de que siga, Mace, o quieres agregar algo.
It strikes me a bit of a, well, it's surprising to see how different it is, the distribution between Americas or the US and, in your case, Scotland. Even though it's Edinburgh, which is the capital, you told us that there was like a 4-year gap between the release of the movies and when you were able to catch some of them.
There was a kind of Disney had a re-release policy that was timed. This was a kind of global policy. It wasn't just Scotland. That they wouldn't. It's so difficult to get this across. Now that you have Disney Plus and you just hit a button and you pay a subscription, you can see any of Disney anytime. They wanted to, I mean, Disney hesitated about VHS, because they kind of didn't want to give away their library, their catalog in that way, in the way that movie companies hesitated about letting movies be broadcast on television in the 1950s. People were not sure about the technology, but you just had to wait years and years and years for the chance to see any of like Pinocchio or Peter Pan. Just it was at the mercy of the Disney Corporation decision about what movie they would re-release. And if another studio, like when Don Bluth came out with Secret of Nim, or when other people somewhere in the world tried to release an animated feature film, Disney would aggressively release one of their top titles the same week to kill off the competition. And they were being a cutthroat corporation. So you had to. I mean, I also remember when Jungle Book was released, the local cinema that we went to was run by a local family, the family that built the cinema in the 1940s. And they sold more tickets than they had seats because people were lining up around the block to see it. So I had to sit on my mother's knee to watch Jungle Book. And you only went to see the movie once.
Crazy.
Like, we didn't have the money to go back and see it twice. So everybody in the schoolyard on Monday would be like reliving moments from the movies. But I learned later in life, and this is, I guess, a reflection on my level of intelligence or ambition as a child. At the same time that I was sitting on my mom's knee in the front row of the balcony at the Dominion Cinema in Edinburgh watching Jungle Book for the first time, there was a little boy in Germany called Andreas Deja, also sitting watching the first release of Jungle Book in Germany. And I went home and just went, oh, that was amazing. Andreas went home and wrote to the Disney studios and said, I want to work for you. What do I do? Like, I'm at school. And he got a letter back from the Disney studios and they said, draw, just keep drawing. And when you're old enough, send us your drawings. And Andreas animated Scar. He animated Jafar. He's a millionaire on the strength of his character animation skills at Disney. But that boldness to say, for those of us who grew up in the 60s, the idea that you would get on an airplane was like science fiction. We had a kid in our class whose dad took the family to Disneyland in the summer. And that kid was like a superhero when he came back to school, not just because he'd been to Disneyland, he'd been on an airplane. And we watched the moon landings. So the idea that I would grow up and be a Disney animator was like saying I would grow up and be Neil Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin and I would walk on the moon. Animation at that level. We had quite a lot of children's stop motion animation. There were some really, really good stop motion animators in the UK, like Oliver Postgate and Burra and Hardwick and Film Fair. A lot of stuff that was short format stop motion stuff for children. But the Disney level stuff was like NASA. There was only one, and it was in America, and you were never going to go there because that was like the moon. It was so far away. So, but Andreas had the intelligence to go, no, that's where I want to go. I want to work there. And he wrote a letter, and they wrote back. So.
Oh, wow, that's so crazy. Ok, lo que Fraser nos está contando aquí es bastante divertido, bastante interesante, porque nos está diciendo que, por ejemplo, cuando se estrenó el libro de la selva en Escocia, en su ciudad, el cine, pues era un cine familiar, o sea que la familia construyó en los 40s y seguían siendo dueños del cine, entonces que vendieron más tickets de los asientos que tenía la sala. Entonces, para él ver el libro de la selva, cuando él lo vio, él estaba sentado le tocó sentarse en las piernas de su mamá para poder ver la película del libro de la selva, y él salió impresionado. Y dice que al mismo tiempo, en Alemania, había otro animador viendo también el libro de la selva. Este animador es André, what was his name again? André what?
Andreas Deja.
Andrés Deja. Okay.
Yeah.
And which character did you say he animated?
Oh, he animated
Jafar?
Scar in Lion King. He
Oh,
animated Jafar in Aladdin. He worked on Lilo and Stitch.
Okay.
He's one of the top character animators ever.
Okay, I didn't know
he,
his name.
he came to London to work on Roger Rabbit, and he has done a book about the 9 old men of Disney as well. He's a great guy.
Ok, y dice que este chico alemán mandó su carta, los de Disney le contestaron que si él quiere, sí le contestaron afortunadamente, y le contestaron que si él quiere trabajar en Disney, que siga dibujando y dibujando y dibujando, y cuando él sea lo suficientemente mayor, mande sus dibujos a Disney y que muy probablemente lo contraten. Y eso es lo que hizo, y él animó a Scar en El Rey León, animó, you said Jafar, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Ajá, o sea, y diferentes personajes, trabajó en Who Framed Roger Rabbit, etcétera. Entonces es uno de los grandes animadores de Disney, ¿no? Y fue un niñito pues que escribió su carta, y como le respondieron, tuvo la motivación suficiente para seguir dibujando y dibujando.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Otro dato igual interesante que dio fue el momento histórico en el que sucedía todo esto, porque fue en los 60s. Y en los 60s el mundo es muy diferente el día de hoy a como era en aquel entonces.
Muy diferente. Muy.
Nos dice que incluso el simple hecho de viajar en avión era algo que no cualquiera tenía al alcance, como hoy en día, ¿no? Y que quien podía hacerlo era o porque era sumamente afortunado o porque era sumamente privilegiado, o ambas, ¿no? Y que justamente contaba una anécdota de un compañero de la escuela que pudo viajar a Estados Unidos, pudo viajar a Disney, y entonces era doblemente un héroe en su comunidad, porque pues, no solo había ido a Disney, que estaba en otro país, sino que además había viajado en avión, y eso también nos pone mucho en contexto justamente cómo es que se mueve o cómo se movía la gente, cómo eran las circunstancias, y el gran logro realmente que fue no solamente que nuestro invitado, sino pues el personaje del que nos comenta Andreas, que pudieron cumplir su sueño de trabajar en Disney, de irse a Estados Unidos, trabajar con gente en Estados Unidos, cuando el mundo era básicamente más grande de lo que es hoy en día. Y eso también me parece que es muy importante recalcarlo, porque hoy en día sí que se da mucho por sentado muchas de las cosas que tenemos, como el streaming o como las oportunidades que nos da el internet, LinkedIn y demás, que en ese entonces no estaban. Entonces yo creo que sí es un gran logro, no solo que siguieran sus sueños, sino que pudieran alcanzar lo que alcanzaron.
Sí,
Gracias,
Fraser compara el hecho de él haber podido trabajar en Disney, que esa idea era como decir, yo quiero ser astronauta, yo quiero ser Neil Armstrong o algo así. Era decir, yo quiero ser animador en Disney, ¿no? Que de hecho cuando yo decidí irme a estudiar animación, también eso era algo rarísimo, o sea, incluso, ahora no me imagino en tus tiempos, o sea, decir eso ha de haber sido muy loco. It has to be super wild, like saying to somebody, "Oh, I want to work at Disney. I want to be an animator,
Oh,
so I'm gonna pursue that." Like probably that was very wild, and people will think you're loony or something like that, right?
well, so the way things played out, I, even though I hadn't written a letter to Disney and they hadn't said you've got to keep drawing, I loved drawing and I loved making images. And from when I was, as long as I can remember, and I received a lot of encouragement for it. The other thing that, as well as having a mother and father who were not afraid to encourage me, um, because my father was a journalist and because Edinburgh had an annual arts festival, he got free tickets to everything. And my father was very tall and he had very long legs. So all of the theatres and all of the concert halls that would send tickets to his newspaper would send tickets for the end of a row so that he had room for his feet. So we got the best seats for opera, ballet, the Japanese Bunraku puppet theater. I saw Laurence Olivier playing Shylock, and I saw Yehudi Menuhin playing Vivaldi, and I didn't pay for any of it. And at the end of August, beginning of September, every year, there was just this flood of culture. And as a child, I spent more time in the theater and the concert hall than I did in the cinema. So I had this very rich experience of other people's art. And then my mother and father found me a place, a high school. Many high schools invest money in science labs or in music departments or in sports facilities. Find me a high school that gives a damn about visual art. But this high school had a completely separate building for art and design. And I learned art history, printmaking, ceramics, enameling, as in high school. And that was
Oh wow, that is so crazy.
yeah. So that high school, to this day, I spoke at my art teacher's funeral not long before I came to Mexico, and that was completely revolutionary. Still today, there are very, very few schools that support and encourage visual communication skills. We treat it in most of our education system as a pre-literate skill. It's okay to draw and make pictures until you're 5 or 6 years old. The moment you've learned how to read, write, and count, stop doing that. Stop drawing in your school book. It's a form of disobedience in most education systems. So by the time, and we no longer have enough of a respect for it culturally that we even have art teachers who can properly encourage a child's interest in design or art. And I was just ridiculously lucky that I was born to the right people in the right place at the right time, and I got to go to that high school. And I know so few other people that had that kind of double whammy of free access to culture and a high school that gave a damn about visual art.
Wow, eso está muy, muy interesante. Lo que Fraser nos está diciendo es que él era un chico muy afortunado, porque no solo, bueno, ya dijimos que sus papás pues lo apoyaban muchísimo para dibujar, para que él estuviera dibujando y dibujando, que es lo que ama, sino que su papá, por el periódico en el que él trabajaba, le daban boletos gratis para todo tipo de evento artístico, cultural, o sea, para ballets, para conciertos, orquestas, teatro. Y como su papá era muy alto y de piernas muy largas, le daban los mejores asientos para que él tuviera suficiente espacio para poner los pies. Entonces a Fraser, pues de pequeñito lo llevaban, toda su vida lo estuvieron llevando a todo este tipo de eventos artísticos, conciertos, teatro, etcétera. Entonces realmente él creció, pues llenando su cabeza de arte, realmente atendiendo todo esto, presenciando todos estos eventos artísticos, y aparte él se la pasaba dibujando. Y luego dice que lo más sorprendente y donde tuvo más suerte es que en general en Europa las preparatorias, los high school, los bachilleratos invierten mucho dinero pues en ciencias, en deportes, a lo mejor en música, pero en sus épocas difícilmente una escuela iba a invertir mucho dinero en arte. Pero pues afortunadamente su familia encontraron un high school, una preparatoria que tenía un edificio aparte solo dedicado a las artes. Entonces él desde high school, desde la preparatoria, él aprendió cerámica, aprendió a hacer medios impresos, aprendió a hacer muchos tipos de arte, esculpir, etcétera. Y desde antes de empezar la universidad. Entonces él tuvo mucha suerte, especialmente en una época donde está bien que dibujes siendo niño, pero ya cuando empiezas a poder leer o a poder hacer matemáticas, pues ya te golpean las manos y no deja de estar dibujando en tus cuadernos, y ya dibujar es una forma de desobediencia casi, pero él tuvo mucha suerte de que pues nunca lo hicieron ver al arte como una forma de desobediencia, ¿no? That is
It
so,
is
that is so,
yeah, it is
dale,
it
Mike,
is
dale.
quite impressive, quite amazing that you had the chance to, like you said, being so
Yeah.
lucky to being
Yeah.
able to go into the arts at such a
Yeah.
young age. Is this school in Edinburgh as well? Is it
It's in Edinburgh.
in Scotland? In
Yeah.
Edinburgh.
It's a private school. You have to pay to, my father, when he went into journalism, he realized that everybody drank alcohol and everybody smoked. My father did drink beer and wine, but he didn't start drinking at lunchtime the way that the journalists did. But when they wanted to have a family, he decided he wasn't going to smoke, he wasn't going to drink. He didn't get paid very much. Even as an editor of a newspaper, he had quite a low salary. But the money he did save, he spent on our education. His specialist subject as a journalist was education. And he was criticized heavily for sending his sons to private schools. And I didn't like being privileged. I really didn't like the fact that I had access to this and not every child did. I didn't like being lucky because I thought it was unfair that not everybody had to get this. But my dad and my mom, they wanted to, their journey out of poverty in the 20s and 30s was through education. They both grew up in very real poverty in Scotland, and they didn't want that to repeat in our generation. So they put money into the education. But the school is still there. And I visited when I wrote the book. I was invited by the school. My art school never invited me back. I've never crossed the doorstep since, but my high school asked me back, and I brought my high school art teacher who was still alive, and we did this wonderful day at the art school and wrote at the art department and wrote about it. And I just felt so grateful to them that was really the starting point of my being able to have a career in visual art.
Oh, wow, that's so cool. Fraser nos está diciendo que, bueno, su papá como periodista realmente no ganaba mucho dinero, a pesar de que era el editor del periódico, y su especialidad era en periodismo, también era de educación, ¿no? O sea, él hacía mucho periodismo y escribía cosas acerca de la educación, investigaba acerca de la educación. Entonces, para él era muy importante poder invertir en educación, y esta escuela donde él estudió, pues era privada. Entonces, lo poco que su papá pudo ahorrar, pues lo gastó en educación para él y sus hermanos, escuelas privadas. A Fraser la verdad es que no le gustaba mucho esa idea de él sí tener este privilegio de poder estar en una escuela privada cuando muchas otras personas pues no tenían la oportunidad de hacerlo. Y él lo pudo hacer y él está muy contento. Dice que hace no mucho pues regresó a esa escuela donde él estudió y pudo dar una conferencia, presentar el libro que él hizo, y que también le vamos a preguntar a Fraser sobre su libro. Entonces sí, bastante afortunado, y él está pues muy, muy agradecido con eso, ¿no? Fraser, so now your story is getting closer, right? It's getting closer to
I'm almost
Disney.
there.
It's
Almost there.
Not quite there, but not quite there. O sea, ya Fraser cada vez su historia se acerca más y más a cómo llegó a ser un animador en Disney y todo eso, pero vamos a ver qué nos sigue aquí con su historia. So, what happened after that amazing high school in Edinburgh?
I left school as soon as I could. I got out. I loved my art education at school, but I really didn't like school. I wasn't a happy school kid most of the time. I was lucky with the art education, but the rest of it, I couldn't get away quickly enough. So I left school at 17, when most of my contemporaries left school at 18. And the way that we were examined in our skills for different subjects, we had a particular Scottish system for art education exams. So you had a 2-day examination where you did written papers on history of art, then you had to make a painting, you had to do designs, and by a process I still don't quite understand, I found out that I didn't just get the highest mark for art in my school or my city, I got the highest mark in Scotland. And it's a small country, you know, so there's like, it's not that big of a deal, but
it's not China, right? So
yeah, I got a kind of crazy off the dial high mark for art. And I thought, great, this was happy me. I'm going to leave and I'm going to do exactly what I've always wanted to do. And I'm going to go to art college. And there was an art college in Edinburgh. And I thought, this is just like, you know, the next step. And I put my artwork into a portfolio that I bought in an art supply shop. And I sent it off with my application form. And 3 weeks later, they sent it back and went, no, we don't want you. And I just went, what? Like, this doesn't, I don't, how, like, I just ran the race. I won the race. I crossed the finish line. I did everything I was told to. What do you mean you don't want me? And
wow.
It completely broke me. I mean, because that was all I was going to do. And, you know, at the age of 17, I just came apart. I was like, no, this, like, that doesn't, I did everything right. Why, how can I not, how, this should be automatic. So
Fraser, do you mind if we leave a little cliffhanger so we can translate this part, which is really, really cool?
A ver, dale, Mazo.
Ok, lo que nos estaba diciendo Fraser es que él nunca fue como un niño muy aplicado en la escuela. La parte artística le fascinó, siempre fue lo que más le estuvo gustando de su educación, pero lo demás que involucra la educación, pues como todos sabemos que también es bastante estructurado de una manera muy lineal, muy general, no se le daba bien. Entonces él, pues en cuanto pudo, se salió de la escuela. Él terminó un año antes, a los 17 años. Sus contemporáneos lo terminaron a los 18. Y bueno, justo junto con esto, él tomó una prueba, más bien dentro de sus pruebas, salió con el mayor puntaje en arte, no solamente de su escuela, sino de todo Escocia, de todo el país. Entonces, pues eso básicamente le trazó el camino. Dijo, ok, perfecto, o sea, ya tengo lo que necesito, vámonos para estudiar arte, y empezó pues a visualizar una carrera en artes, y justamente había un college, una universidad de arte en Edimburgo, en Escocia. Dijo, perfecto, de aquí soy. Entonces él fue, aplicó para la escuela, todo perfecto, dijo, tengo las notas, tengo el talento, ya soy un ganador. Y pues, ¿cuál es la sorpresa? Que unas semanas después llegan los resultados y le dicen, no, muchas gracias, no lo queremos en nuestra escuela, por favor, váyase de aquí y no lo queremos volver a ver. Entonces, pues, le cayó pues una gran sorpresa, no solamente porque, bueno, de entrada estaba confiado, era joven, y pues todo apuntaba, ¿no?, a que pues iba a ser básicamente una puerta abierta para él, pero cuál fue una gran sorpresa que le dijeron no, todavía no dice por qué, ahorita vamos hacia ello, pero pues definitivamente fue un golpe duro para él, porque pues esto pasó a sus 17 años y fue literal así el golpe directo a los sueños.
Yeah, it's very interesting, right? Like you left us here with a cliffhanger, like, but it's interesting. But that reminded me the same story with some German dictator, right? Like some Austrian dictator that got also rejected from art school, right? Like, But I'm happy that you
This
didn't do
could
the
end up
same, right?
really bad.
It could be the start of the Fourth Reich. It could have been, yeah, I could have gone way off the deep end.
I'm so happy I
I-
didn't follow those.
I
those
have to say
steps.
gracias to Joseph Aragon, who's comparing me in the chat section to Leonardo da Vinci and Tesla. Thank you, Joseph. It's so here's what happened. The same amazing art teacher who had built this separate building for art and design. One of the problems at the point where I left school was he became very sick. He was diagnosed with diabetes, so he was off ill a lot of the time that I was in my final year, and he wasn't around to give me the guidance of how to present my work. But part of the difficulty was, in all of the art schools, there was a very strong movement away from representational art towards abstraction, and then later towards conceptual art. And if I say it's art, it's art. If I put my bed in a gallery, it's automatically art. If I cut a shark in half, it's automatically art. All of that stuff. Personally speaking, from my perspective now, because I've studied all my life the history of art and design, Marcel Duchamp made that joke once. He didn't even originate the urinal that he put into the gallery. He stole it off a female artist. He was a complete charlatan. He made that joke once. It was funny once. We should have got over it a long time ago. And if young people, I'm not against the idea of the avant-garde. I'm not against the idea of the experimental. I think they need to coexist. But I was trying to get into art school at a point where that viewpoint was taking over in a kind of Stalinist purge, where everything that had gone before was to be wiped out. And we were going to go into this brave new landscape of non-representational, conceptual. And I really object to that idea that people can form a kind of clique or mafia that denigrates people that disagree with them and makes it actually impossible. You know, the last time I had contact with my art school, we were trying to borrow easels to let people draw. They didn't know where they were because they hadn't taught figure drawing seriously for such a long time. They couldn't even find the easels. And this was one of the most important buildings in Scotland, and they let it burn down twice. And this was the Charles Rennie Mackintosh Glasgow School of Art building, which is now in ruins. And it was one of the most important cultural icons in Scotland. But this whole idea that when I was a student, eventually, and I'll get to how I got to be a student, I only ever heard Walt Disney's name as an insult. That was like oh, that's like Disney. It was the equivalent of using the word shit. And I've never been invited back to my art school because from their point of view, I went over to the dark side. I went into commercial work. So even when I wrote the book, I never, they're not interested. They write to me asking me for money, but they don't write to me saying, oh, come back and tell us about your interesting career, because my career is not interesting to them because it's not art. Whereas putting a shark or a bed in a gallery is art. So that was the beginning of all that process. And I was unaware of this as a 17-year-old. I didn't know that was what was waiting for me. So that was part of the reason that I got turned down. But my art teacher invited me back to the art school.
But wait, let me tell the audience why were you turned down. Bueno, el chiste es que a Fraser lo rechazaron básicamente porque cuando él aplicó había una gran tendencia, el arte estaba cambiando y estaba muy de moda este tipo de arte, ¿no? Arte, ¿cómo lo llamarían? Abstracto, por así decirlo.
Fue justo en la ruptura de movimientos cuando sale el arte contemporáneo y el conceptualismo, que básicamente a grandes rasgos toma más en cuenta el concepto, la idea de la obra o de la pieza del arte que la pieza misma. Todo esto sale a raíz de una exposición de una sola pieza de Marcel Duchamp, que es el migitorio muy famoso, que pues es nada más hay una, literal, es un migitorio puesto en un pedestal en una galería. Entonces de ahí es que sale el arte contemporáneo y toda esta nueva ola del conceptualismo y básicamente el arte se empieza a ir hacia esa corriente, que es lo que hasta el día de hoy permea y obedece únicamente a los valores del mercado del arte. Entonces, cuando Fraser aplica a la universidad, está justo en todo este movimiento y lo que querían era una visión más como arriesgada, más de, sí, o sea, más de concepto, más de innovación, todas estas cosas que hasta el día de hoy se está luchando con eso en el arte. Entonces, lo que él quería, que era pues mucho más arte tradicional, ¿no? O sea, obviamente pues todo lo que son artes visuales, artes plásticas, pues le dicen, no, o sea, tú ya estás básicamente obsoleto, no queremos ese tipo de pensamiento aquí. Esa es una de las razones por la cual, bueno, la gran razón por la cual no lo aceptan en la universidad. Y también
Sí,
nos contaba que pues años después incluso ha tenido otros roces con la universidad que han incluso lo han contactado, pero no para reconocerle su trayectoria, ni su talento, ni nada de eso, sino que han sido razones muy burdas, como pues obviamente querer poner, ¿no?, la etiquetita y el pin de el nombre en la pared y pues que hasta dinero le han pedido, pero no le han reconocido realmente su trayectoria porque pues de nuevo, o sea, para esa universidad en particular y pues, en general para el mundo del arte, lo que ahorita vale pues es más como este arte, pues, ¿qué diríamos? Como arriesgado, como innovador, como hay una palabra que se me fue ahorita, pero bueno, básicamente lo que quieren es un plátano pegado en la pared, que ni siquiera te puedes llevar a tu casa, te puedes llevar el papel que te dice que compraste ese plátano en la pared y puedes pegar todos los plátanos que quieras uno a la vez en tu casa porque esa es tu obra, ¿no? Entonces, ese es el arte que se estaba tratando de incentivar en ese momento.
Sí, qué loco eso. Y además, sí, pues le decían como que casi él por ser un artista de Disney, pues que se fue al lado oscuro, ¿no? Entonces, eso no es arte porque eso es muy comercial y eso, bueno, eso ya lo hemos escuchado mucho. So, Fraser, how did you got into school? ¿Cómo regresaste a la
So
escuela entonces?
the two largest cities in Scotland are Edinburgh, which is the capital, which is a little bit kind of wealthier and more artsy, and Glasgow is also wealthy, but wealthy through industry. And the Glasgow School of Art had still a reputation for teaching traditional drawing and painting skills. And when I was told by the Edinburgh College of Art, we don't want you, my art teacher from high school heard about it. And I had another thing that I would love everybody to appreciate, because so often people, they talk, it's like, oh, you're so talented, you're so, like, there's something about your artistic ability that is somehow supernatural. It's really a combination of work and luck. And I have been incredibly lucky. When I left school at 17, my higher education was paid for by the government. We received a grant from our government to study, because this was the time in history before the university model moved over to teaching for profit. And the governments used to believe that it was worth making an investment in people's education. And higher education was about the pursuit of excellence, not about the pursuit of high intake, high turnover, competitive stuff. You know, there's universities on every corner now in Scotland. There used to be one university per city, and now there's just a crazy crowd of universities. And I will rant about that some other time. But I had the opportunity for 1 year from the age of 17 to the age of 18 to go to the university in Edinburgh and study history of art. And my high school teacher said, take up the offer, study history of art, and in your spare time, come back to high school and we will help you prepare a portfolio to go to the School of Art in Glasgow. And they helped me prepare it. I got accepted, and I moved from the university to the art school, and I went to the art school in Glasgow in 1979 and stayed there till 1983.
Wow, 9 years before I was born.
Yeah.
Okay,
Saw
so
my
Fraser-
head off and count the rings. I'm like a tree.
Entonces lo que Fraser nos está contando aquí es que, bueno, después de haber sido rechazado por todo eso, realmente universidades había muy pocas, pero su profesor del high school, de la preparatoria, lo que le dijo es, ¿sabes qué? Toma la oportunidad, porque él fue aceptado en la carrera de Historia del Arte. Entonces, él se metió a estudiar Historia del Arte de 17 a 18 años y le dijeron, y mientras estudias Historia del Arte, que eso es increíble para cualquier artista, vente a la preparatoria y te ayudamos a preparar un buen portafolio para que apliques para entrar a la Universidad de Arte de Glasgow, porque había dos universidades muy grandes para arte, que era la Universidad de Edimburgo y la Universidad de Glasgow. Entonces, él, pues con ese portafolio, logró por fin, pues, entrar a la Universidad de Glasgow en el 79. So, what happened next?
So I'm going to jump back a few years to when I was 14, just to put this in perspective. The other thing that we were lucky with growing up in Edinburgh is Edinburgh has a wonderful collection of art galleries. There's a modern art gallery, there's a portrait gallery, there's the Royal Scottish Academy where the living artists exhibit each year, and there's the National Gallery of Scotland, where they have paintings by Van Gogh, Rembrandt, Gauguin, all the greats. And I would go with my mom and dad and I would stand in front of the paintings. And when I was younger, I just wanted to look at the images. I just wanted to drink in the paintings themselves. And I wasn't that interested in the little notices next to the frame with all the information. And there's a painting by Diego Velázquez called The Old Woman Cooking Eggs. And it's one of a series of paintings that he did, these bodegones. And it's I can't describe how beautiful this painting is.
The
and
way
I just
he uses the light is amazing, amazing.
Incredible. And we now know that along with Vermeer and Caravaggio, he was experimenting with lenses and projections, and nobody knew that at the time. You know, there were suspicions about it, but the painting itself, it doesn't really matter. It's beautiful. It doesn't matter how it was achieved. It's a beautiful painting. And I was 14 years old. I was standing in front of this painting for the 100th time. And for the first time, I looked at the little card and it said, Diego Velázquez, born 1599. Old Woman Cooking Eggs, painted in 1618. And I went, oh my God, this is the work of a 19-year-old boy. And I stood back and I thought, shit, I have 5 years to get that good. that was my goal. It was like, I need to be able.
Whoa.
And then I started going to see like the Codex Hammer, like the Leonardo sketchbooks. And I was like, I have to be able to draw like Velázquez. I have to be able to draw like Leonardo. That's what I want to learn to do. And in my soul, for want of a better expression, I knew that was the equivalent of learning to play your scales if you were a piano player, the equivalent of having strong or flexible muscles if you're a dancer or an athlete. That was like whatever area of visual communication I want to get into, that's my starting point. I've got to be that good. And that was why I wanted to go to art school without a clear picture of how I would turn that into a career or money.
Exactly. Probably you didn't have a clue on everything they have to do to get there, right? Like, because those pieces of art are unique, right? Are fantastic. So
But the thing is, if you go back to what I was saying about the streets being empty when Disney was on television, I equated the two things. I didn't yet know that there would be any avenue through which I could connect my love of watching Disney and my love of making images to me working for Disney. Like that was still a moon landing. That was still way off. But for me, looking at Diego Velázquez's Old Woman Cooking Eggs and looking at Snow White, same thing.
Wow. Y esto está muy interesante lo que nos está diciendo Fraser, porque se regresó a cuando tenía 14 años. Entonces, él iba a estos museos donde tenían grandes pinturas, ¿no? Tenían Rembrandts, tenían cosas de Gauguin, tenían cosas de Diego Velasco, ¿no? Entonces lo que nos está diciendo es que él vio una pintura de Diego Velasco, le gustaba mucho pararse y ver las pinturas, nada más, no le interesaba leer la tarjetita de la descripción y cuándo fue hecha ni nada. Entonces dice que cuando llegó a ver esa pintura por la 100ª vez, que le gustaba tanto, se le ocurrió leer la tarjetita que decía en qué año fue pintada. Entonces él vio, se puso a ver, Diego Velasco en qué año nació, en qué año fue pintada. Entonces él se dio cuenta que esa pintura, pues, Diego la hizo cuando tenía 19 años. Fraser tenía 14 y dijo, chinga, entonces cuando tenga 19, o sea, tengo 5 años para poder pintar así, si no soy un idiota. Entonces se puso a darle duro, pero dice que él sentía lo mismo casi cuando veía esa pintura de Diego de Velasco a cuando veía Blancanieves, que para él era igual de sorprendente, igual de fantástico, y él todavía como que no lograba conectar o crear como una relación muy directa entre lo mucho que le gustaban las caricaturas de Disney y lo mucho que le gustaban esas pinturas. Él ya estudiaba arte, ya era un artista, pero como que todavía no lograba conectar eso, ¿no?
Para quien quiera ver cuál fue esa pintura que lo inspiró a echarle
A ver,
ganas,
compártela.
no sé si la puedo
No sé.
compartir, pero puedo compartir el nombre. La pueden buscar como Vieja friendo huevos, Diego de Velázquez.
It's an incredible picture, and so the next
Las Meninas, I really love Las Meninas.
Yeah. Oh, I've only been
amazing.
to the Prado in Madrid once, but unbelievable. So the way art school education was structured, the art schools were entirely separate from the universities. They were different colleges completely, and they had a different approach. So obviously, to learn to be an artist or a designer, a lot of the time is spent doing practical work and less time is spent doing written work. But I loved the written work as well because we had such good history of art teachers, wonderful people. And I responded very well to that side of it also because I'd spent, in my high school, we got taught history of art. I'd spent a year at university doing history of art. So the written side of it didn't freak me out. I really appreciated that. I really loved it. But the practical side was wonderful. And we had a 4-year course. So the first year was general studies, and you drew every day. And we had figure classes, drawing from the nude, going to museums, drawing buildings, learning perspective, clay modeling, printmaking, ceramics, all in a year. You did all of these things and drawing all the time drawing. And I was in heaven. This is what I want. And in my head, when I arrived at the age of 18, after those problems and disappointments, I was kind of thinking maybe I'm going to be a painter, because when I went to our other big gallery, the Royal Scottish Academy, and I saw the work of the living painters, there were some painters active in Scotland whose work I thought was really interesting. And I thought maybe I can be a painter and my work will be seen in galleries. So I went to the Glasgow School of Art. I had a wonderful first year and I was thinking, great, I'm getting to draw, do all these things, and maybe I'll wind up as a painter. So that's part one of the next bit, if you want to translate that.
Ok. Se dice que cuando logró entrar a la escuela de arte... por cierto, están haciendo ahorita preguntas. Ahorita vamos a enfocarnos tantito en la entrevista de Fraser, pero al final, si quieren preguntarle lo que quieran preguntarle, vamos a leer sus preguntas y que él conteste pues lo que pueda, y siempre y cuando haya tiempo. Pero bueno, lo que nos estaba contando es que ya en la escuela de arte para él fue como un sueño, ¿no? Sí tuvo que hacer muchas cosas, o sea, materias donde tenía que hacer cosas escritas, etcétera, que le gustaban también, pero lo que más le gustaba era la parte práctica, porque todo el tiempo estaban dibujando y dibujando, y pues en un solo año, o sea, tenían que dibujar cosas así como desnudos, edificios, paisajes, o sea, dibujaban de todo y también le enseñaban cerámicas, escultura, le enseñaban diferentes cosas que a él le encantaba. Entonces realmente para él eso era como un sueño, esa escuela. Entonces el primer año él empezó a ver que en Escocia pues había ciertos pintores que estaban vivos, contemporáneos a él, que presentaban cosas en galerías de arte. Entonces él dijo, bueno, yo ya he tenido la oportunidad de pintar y dibujar y hacer muchas cosas, tal vez yo podría también incurrir en eso, o sea, ser un pintor pues de galerías de arte, ¿no? So, what happened next?
So then everything turned to shit again temporarily. So
Todo se fue a la mierda después de eso, dice Fraser.
Just, up and down, up and down. So I had a fantastic time in my first year, but the problem was we were then expected to choose a department that we would study in for the 3 remaining years. And it was divided in 2, like day and night. You either went into a fine art department, like drawing and painting, printmaking, ceramics, or you went into a design department, which included furniture design, interior design, product design, textile design, and graphic design. Now, I looked at that divide and I just thought, why is this like cutting a lady in half? Like, I don't understand why you choose fine art, you choose design. Like, this seems very weird. And also, there was no, I would have loved to have been a theater designer. I would have loved to have designed sets for theater because I grew up in the theater. There was none of that. I would have loved to have done movie design. Movies were not art. I would have loved to have done animation. There was no animation available. And if you talk to a lot of people from my generation, many of us who didn't grow up in California studied graphic design because it was universally the closest thing you could get to being able to work in popular culture. So one of the reasons that I decided not to go into the fine art department of drawing and painting and instead to go into the design department of graphic design, I met some painters and most of them were male, white, divorced, alcoholic, manic depressives. And I just thought, that's not a career trajectory. I don't find that appealing. And they were also all completely obsessed with what everybody thought about them. Is my name famous enough? Are enough people buying my paintings? Do my paintings cost more than another? And I just thought, oh, fuck off. I just, like, that's no way to live. And one of the things many years later that I discovered that was an absolute saving grace about working in movies and animation is nobody gives a shit who you are. And your name is a tiny little name in a long, long list of hundreds of other people. And you get to be involved in something that people are still delighted to see 70, 80 years later. Whereas a lot of these people who are burning up all their energy on, am I famous enough as a painter? Am I famous enough as an illustrator?
Yeah, it's like an Instagram artist, right? Like nowadays, it's the equivalent of an Instagram artist.
Yeah. So that was what made me move into graphic design. Was I met some painters and I thought, I don't want to do this. And also I loved music. I loved cinema, and I grew up in the era where buying music was buying vinyl. So you would spend your pocket money on a 7-inch 45 revs per minute single or on a 12-inch 33 1/3 album. And the artwork on the album sleeves was very often beautiful illustrations that were at the level of Renaissance drawing, or whether there was a few illustrators that were doing such beautiful work in album sleeve design for music. And I thought, maybe that's where I'll go. Maybe I'll go into designing album sleeves, and this is going to be a good choice. I'll go into the graphic design department. So that's part
Ok.
2.
A ver, dale a esta, Mace, dale tú a esta.
Sí, sí. Dice, bueno, la segunda parte de el escalón que nos va a llevar hacia su carrera, fue que dice que llega un punto en la carrera en el que te tenías que especializar, o sea, te tienes que especializar en alguna área en particular del arte, que igual nunca me ha parecido a mí. Comparto la opinión de Fraser que es un desperdicio estar dividiendo el arte así, pero bueno, básicamente lo dividían en 2 departamentos únicamente, que era el departamento de arte plástico, sería la traducción, que es todo lo que es arte pues clásico, tradicional, ¿no? Pintura, escultura, grabado, dibujo, cerámica, todo esto, ¿no? Y la otra parte era la parte de diseño, la dividían en diseño, y eso ya incluía diseño de todo, diseño industrial, diseño de muebles, diseño de telas, diseño de interiores, y junto con eso el diseño gráfico. Y pues nos dice Fraser que hubo varios factores importantes para la decisión que tomó, que fue irse hacia el departamento de diseño en vez del departamento de arte. Que primero que nada fue que conoció a artistas vivos, conoció a pintores, y la visión que le dieron no era nada positiva. O sea, básicamente es así, el estereotipo del bohemio, que todos eran hombres, todos eran heterosexuales, la mayoría blancos, todos divorciados, todos alcohólicos y todos maniáticos, ¿no? Entonces, y depresivos. Entonces, y además que pues también vio la visión justamente que hay dentro de la parte artística de los grandes artistas plásticos, que es cuánto vale mi obra, cuánto vale mi nombre, cuánto reconocimiento hay por mi persona que se traduce en la obra, pero básicamente es eso, es un juego de egos muy grande que no te permite vivir tu vida y no te permite disfrutar de lo que haces, porque ya que caemos en lo que dije anteriormente, ya es el mercado del arte, ya es cuánto de lo que mi nombre produce va a generar dinero y cuánto dinero me va a generar eso, cuánta fama me va a generar eso, si yo soy más o menos que el compañero de al lado, etcétera, ¿no? Entonces, pues esa visión no le gustó para nada. Y la otra cosa es que, bueno, que en su momento no había lo que hay hoy en día, no había animación tal cual, no había una cosa, pues cine, el cine no era arte en ese momento, no había tampoco un departamento de diseño de teatro, por ejemplo, ¿no? De escenario. Dice que todas esas cosas, pues le hubieran encantado haberse metido en cosas con las que él creció, que pues justamente música, teatro, danza, todo esto. Lo más cerca que podía llegar a ser con los recursos que tenía era con diseño gráfico, porque el diseño gráfico se utilizaba mucho siempre se ha utilizado para publicidad, para medios publicitarios, y eso también te abre la puerta para otro tipo de cosas como comerciales, etcétera. Entonces, lo que más se acercaba como para llegar a lo que era la cultura pop era el diseño gráfico, y que además pues era también un medio que te permite hacer y deshacer. No es lo mismo como cuando la exposición depende de tu nombre, a como cuando estás en un proyecto en el que eres uno más de una fila muy larga de gente y que además, ya hablando del cine tal cual, pues estás entre los nombres de toda una lista interminable, pero lo que tú produces es algo que tiene mucho más significado. No es que las pinturas o la escultura o el arte plástico no lo tenga, pero definitivamente es un medio muy diferente trabajar en animación o en cine, porque aun cuando tu nombre no se reconozca o cuando no sepan quién eres o qué hiciste, el producto que tú creas, de lo que tú eres parte, puede ser disfrutado por muchas generaciones, por mucho tipo de gente, y pues le puedes alegrar el día a mucha gente de una manera muy especial. Entonces, eso fue también lo que le gustó mucho, ese tipo como de anonimato para poder hacer y deshacer a su gusto.
Y también nos
Gracias, Maes.
comentó que le gustaba mucho comprar discos de vinil, que era la forma en la que tú comprabas música, y que las portadas de los discos de vinil, o sea, esos como sobrecitos de cartón en donde vienen los discos, los diseños eran increíbles para él, o sea, al nivel de una pintura renacentista, y había muchos artistas muy, muy talentosos trabajando, haciendo pinturas o sea, diseñando las portadas de los discos. Entonces, dice, a lo mejor yo podría ser un diseñador de portadas de discos de vinil, ¿no? Entonces a lo mejor puedo irme hacia allá, y como que echó la mirada hacia allá. And what happened next, Fraser?
So I went into the Department of Graphic Design and I carried on drawing the way that I had always learned to draw, drawing like my Renaissance heroes. And that didn't go well. I kept being told, that is over. That's finished. Nobody wants that anymore. It's not funny. It's not clever. It's not good. You need to have a style. You need to be, and they would give us the names of all these famous illustrators who at the time were recognized names. If I tell you any of them now, you won't know who they were, but they were held up as, you need to be like, you know, Pollock or Chloe Cheese or all these people. And I did try, and I would not want to show you the result of me trying to be cool and develop a style. It looked horrible. And every time we had an exercise or an assignment where I would carry on drawing or painting in my, like, you know, attempted Renaissance style, they would just freak out and I would get very low grades. And so I didn't stop doing those drawings. I just stopped showing them to the tutors, because to me, if I stopped doing it, it would be like stopping going to the gym or stopping practicing my scales on the piano. I just knew that that was the heartbeat of what I needed to do, was to draw. And I didn't have a clear, it was just on instinct. I knew that but I knew if I kept showing those to my tutors, I would get into endless trouble. And I remember one particular external tutor who set this project for us, which was based on portraiture. And I really enjoy portraiture. I love drawing people. And we were put into pairs and we had to draw one another. And you had to draw somebody from 3 different angles, and then in the style of an artist and as a caricature. That was probably like the lowest point. Well, it was one of the lowest points ever. It was one of like 2 very, very low points. And I put in these drawings that I thought were, they were the best work that I could do. And in front of everybody else, this woman just trashed me. She was like, this is old-fashioned, this is no good, this is terrible, this is blah, blah, blah. You've got no style again, no style. Oh, God. If I ever hear the word style again, I'm going to vomit. It's like, there's just so crazy. So I went through this traumatic experience where even my fellow classmates were, oh my God, like, this woman is being so nasty about this guy's drawings, and the drawings, they look nice, but whatever. And nobody stuck up for me, but I got really trashed and I got a very low mark. And the following week, I was standing in the post office going to mail some letters. And back in the pre-email days, if you wanted to write a letter to somebody in America or Mexico from Scotland, you would buy what was called an airmail letter, which was very thin, light blue paper, and it only weighed so much. And it meant that you could go airmail and get faster mail to internationally. And in Scotland, every year, they would have illustrated airmail letters with, Scottish themes on them, so that the tourists would buy them to send letters home. And every year there was a different illustrator who would do these things. So I was standing waiting to buy stamps, and there was a big cardboard cutout of the worst watercolor painting I've ever seen of anything. It was just horrific. It was ugly. And it was this year's, and I just, in my head, I was thinking, nobody is going to buy this because this is such an ugly piece of artwork. And I got close enough to it, and guess whose work it was? It was the external tutor who tore me apart for the fact that I didn't have a style. And I'm like, bitch, if that's your style, you're in trouble. I'm like,
Oh, wow. That's so crazy. Ok, aquí Fraser lo que nos está diciendo es que, bueno, ya estando en la universidad, ya estando persiguiendo, o sea, tratando de, pues sí, ya haciendo sus ilustraciones, etcétera, lo que le decían todo el tiempo es que él tenía que tener estilo, ¿no? Cualquier cosa que eso signifique, a él le decían que él tenía que tener estilo. Y en ese momento había muchos, diseñadores gráficos, ilustradores que estaban como, pues de moda, ¿no? En publicidad, en muchos lados, ¿no? Publicidades impresas, medios impresos, en periódicos, revistas, etcétera, ¿no? Entonces, toda la gente, pues los artistas, querían dibujar como ellos o querían tener un estilo propio como ellos lo tenían, querían ser más pop, querían estar más de moda, como que ser los chicos cool, ¿no? Y Fraser, la verdad es que su estilo, o sea, él viene de una escuela de bellas artes, ¿no? Donde él siempre dibujó cosas, como digo, de Velázquez, ¿no? O sea, cosas así. Y él venía pues dibujando todos esos y querer dibujar como sus héroes, ¿no? Que eran esos grandes pintores, pues clásicos. Entonces, de repente estaban en una clase donde el ejercicio era, yo me pongo enfrente de alguien y tenemos que dibujarlo, pero con diferentes estilos, ¿no? De estilo de caricatura o estilo tal, bla, bla, bla. Entonces, se ponían uno enfrente del otro. Y una de las instructoras que daba como la clase ahí, empezó a darle un cagón a Fraser, así regañarlo delante de todos, que él dibujaba como cosas muy anticuadas, que no estaba a la moda, que no tenía estilo. Se dice que él ya estaba hasta la madre, estaba escuchando la palabra estilo, ¿no? Que debes de tener estilo. Entonces, pues dice que le dio una regañiza, sus compañeros de clase también lo veían como, híjole, el chico que no tiene estilo, ¿no? Y dice que en la oficina postal muchas veces imprimían unos sobres de la oficina postal que tenían ilustraciones de diferentes artistas, ¿no? En Escocia, para que los extranjeros pues los compraran y enviaran sus cartas dentro de esos sobres bonitos, ¿no? Entonces que de repente vi un cartonzote de, miren, compren, este es el nuevo diseño, ¿no? de nuestros sobres, y dice que vio la peor pintura de acuarela, ¿sí? La peor que había visto, algo horrible, que leyó el nombre del artista y era esa instructora que pues le metió esa regañiza delante de todos porque no tenía estilo, ¿no? Y hasta ahí se quedó su historia. And what happened next after that?
So, I need to stop a little bit and talk about my father, because in World War II, my father joined the Air Force as a volunteer as a teenager. He was too young to go into active service straight away, so he was a volunteer in the Air Force. And when he did go into the Air Force when he was 18, he wanted to be a pilot, but he had eyesight that was as bad as mine, and they wouldn't let him be a pilot. And he was, he was very upset. He wanted to fly planes, but they made him a mechanic for radio and radar at the time, which was brand new technology. So he was one of the first ever radar technicians. And he received this training and then was sent to North Africa in World War II. When he became a journalist, the printing technology in the 1970s and 1980s was one of the first technologies to be digitized. So the way that books and newspapers used to be printed, every individual letter, even on a daily newspaper, was a little bit of metal. So there were all these people all around the world who arranged tiny little metal letters so that you could read a book or read a newspaper. And it was very skilled work, very specialized. And like the revolution in weaving, which was one of the first like computerized punch card processes that led to the Luddite rebellion and all these, points in history where new technology arrives and all these people go, we don't want to lose our jobs, so we're going to stand in the way of the new technology. Because my father had always embraced the new technology that had been put in front of him, whether it was radar in the Air Force or new printing technology in newspapers and publishing, he said to me, I don't care what you do. I don't care if you're working in textiles or ceramics or photography or whatever. If you see changes in technology, you want to embrace those changes. And the other thing that was interesting was my father was one of the very first television presenters in Scotland in the 1950s. And he remembered how the technicians laughed at him when he said that it would be possible to encode a picture on a magnetic tape the way that you could encode sound on magnetic tape. And they were like, no, that'll never be possible. And of course, that's what happened with videotape. So my father was very ahead of his time in terms of the thinking, because he was in all of these kind of survival situations where the new technology was something that he had to embrace. And he said, when technology changes, you cannot stand in its way. The wave is going to come to the shore. You either learn to ride the wave or the wave will go over your head. So when you see new technology, embrace the new technology. So while I was getting criticized for all of my traditional drawing, those thoughts were in my head, if you want to translate that bit.
Sí, o sea, a grandes rasgos a su papá, durante la Segunda Guerra Mundial, le tocó servir como mecánico para los radares, que era tecnología muy nueva, ¿no? Y también cuando él era periodista, pues para imprimir, o sea, en Escocia fueron de los primeros como que en digitalizar ya la impresión, porque antes, bueno, letrita por letrita tú tienes que acomodar letrita por letrita como que en un molde para poder imprimir los periódicos, ¿no? Entonces, su papá lo que él le aconsejaba siempre era de que cuando una nueva tecnología llegue, abrázala, no seas de esos viejitos que dicen, no, las cosas tienen que ser como antes, o sea, que la tecnología es como una ola, o sea, cuando llega a la costa tú tienes que surfear esa ola, ir con esa ola, o si no la ola te va a aplastar. Entonces, siempre para él ese consejo, pues lo tuvo muy presente de su padre, donde cuando la nueva tecnología llegue, agárrala y adóptala, ¿no? O sea, ¿cómo traducirías embrace? Como adoptarla,
Sí,
¿no?
abrázala, abraza
Sí.
abraza lo nuevo porque justo, o sea, es lo que te va a abrir puertas.
Okay, what happened next, Fraser?
So I was in the graphic design department at the Glasgow School of Art, very, very unhappy, because I'm thinking this is going very badly for me. Like all the things that I think I'm doing right, everybody is just screaming and shouting at me that they hate it and my drawing is shit and I don't know what I'm doing. And twice, not once, twice, the head of the department begged me to leave the department because I was just too much trouble. It was like, please go and paint, please go and design fabrics, just get out of the building. Like, it's like we've had enough of you. And both times I said no. And one of the reasons I said no was they had a photography laboratory, so I could work in the darkroom. I could learn to use a camera, and I had a Pentax K1000 single lens reflex, and I taught myself black and white film processing, color film processing, and printing. And I came alive in the darkroom. I love the photography. And one day, the photography technician said, have you thought about working on videotape? And I said, well, that would be kind of interesting, but it's expensive. And he said, oh, no. Every year, the art school has a particular budget and they must spend it on new technology. And they've just bought a portable video camera. Maybe you could experiment with it. And I said, where is it? And they went, well, that's the problem. We don't have control over it. They didn't give the video camera to the graphic design department. They gave it to the mural painting department. And I was like, what is a mural painter going to do with a video camera? Like, why would they do that? And the technician said, well, there's another problem. And I went, what's that? He said, well, you have to edit videotape. And I went, and they didn't buy editing equipment? They went, no, they've bought expensive editing equipment too. And I went, which department has the editing equipment? He went, architecture. And I'm like, what? Like, here I get the opportunity to do something with new technology, and I'm being told about it by the photography technician, and I can't have access to it because the kit has been given to two completely different departments that have no need for the equipment. And I just thought, what am I supposed to do? And the other character in all of this that kind of changed things for me was Freddie Mercury. So Queen, I'm so old, I actually saw Queen in concert in quite a small theatre in Edinburgh in 1976. But one of the things that people forget is that when they released Bohemian Rhapsody, it wasn't that was the first ever music video, but it was the first music video that everybody just went, what on earth is this? This is such amazing, step forward. And just towards the end of my studies, MTV started. So I was an art student looking to experiment with video in that weird gray area between the Bohemian Rhapsody video and MTV. And I thought, if I can get hold of that video camera and the editing equipment, I can not just design the sleeves of the albums, I can do the music videos. And I went on a mad crusade to get hold of the video camera and the editing equipment. And I was like tearing down walls and trying to find people and going, let me have that camera, let me have that editing equipment. And that was the next part.
A ver, más atrás de eso, pero hay que tratar de ser breves para que no se nos acabe.
Para que nos dé el tiempo, ¿no? Sí. Bueno, a grandes rasgos nos dice que llegó un punto en el que su persona ya llegó a ser no grata en el departamento de diseño gráfico, porque pues siempre estaba teniendo problemas justamente por los temas que dijimos, ¿no? Lo del estilo y todas estas cosas que pues no se alineaba, ¿no? Su mentalidad con lo que él hacía. Que llegó al punto en el que el mismo director de la escuela dijo, por favor, escoge otra especialidad, lo que tú quieras, nada más ya vete del departamento de diseño gráfico. Pero él no se iba porque en el departamento de diseño gráfico estaba el departamento de fotografía, estaba la clase de fotografía, el laboratorio de fotografía y revelado. Obviamente, antes se usaban las cámaras de rollo y hay un proceso químico para fijar la imagen en el rollo y para poder revelar las fotografías de los negativos. Entonces, a él le encantaba todo este proceso en el cuarto oscuro, que investiguenlo si no saben, si están muy jóvenes, cómo va todo eso, pero es un proceso excelente. A mí también es de lo que más me gustó en la carrera, pero bueno, él estaba en eso y de repente se acerca al director de foto y le dice, oye, veo como que estás muy interesado en esto, estás mucho tiempo aquí, ¿no te interesaría además aprender a utilizar filmes de película, de celuloide? Y él dice, por supuesto que sí, por favor, ¿dónde encuentro tal maravilla? Y le dice, bueno, pero es muy caro, ¿no? O sea, obviamente es muy caro el material. Y le dice esta persona, bueno, la gran suerte es que pues la escuela tiene un presupuesto anual que se tiene que gastar sí o sí, entonces tenemos equipo de video. Y dice, maravilloso, ¿cómo me hago de él? Y dice, bueno, es que hay un problemita. El equipo de video lo tiene el departamento de muralistas. Entonces, chinga, ¿y por qué los que están pintando murales van a necesitar un equipo de video? Dice, bueno, es que además de pues, utilizar la cámara y el celuloide, necesitas editar el video. Dice, ok, ¿y cuál es el problema aquí? Dice, bueno, es que pues el editor, la máquina de edición, la tiene el departamento de arquitectura. Entonces, bueno, tenía al alcance todo lo que necesitaba para cumplir sus sueños, pero la escuela, obviamente, como no entendían, todo esto era tecnología nueva, en su momento no entendían para qué se usaba ni quién lo iba a usar, entonces lo distribuyeron en departamentos diferentes. Entonces, él se hizo su misión de vida, poder hacerse del equipo, y estuvo tocando puertas y estuvo amenazando gente para que le pudieran permitir utilizar lo nuevo que estaba ya a su alcance.
Sí, además él, algo que también se ve muy inspirado por Queen, porque él, en sus tiempos, él logró ver a Queen en bares pequeñitos, cuando también iban empezando, y cuando salió el video de Bohemian Rhapsody, era algo increíble, ¿no? Ver ese video, entonces, pues él dijo, yo quiero hacer algo así, no solo quiero hacer las portadas de los discos, sino también hacer los videos y editar los videos, ¿no? And what happened next, Fraser?
So I started making music videos, and I had contact with some musicians who let me use their songs, and I chose songs that told a story. And I built sets, and we made costumes for my friends. We did makeup, we did all kinds of stuff, and I just reinvented the wheel. There was nobody that knew how, I learned the equipment from the user's manual, and I would go to the technician in the architecture department to have everything edited. And very early on, she was like, I don't care how clever you are. I don't care how creative you are. You're really badly organized, and I don't have time. It's not my job to find the footage where your friends didn't crash into the scenery or break the props or something. You have to come here with a list of start and end points and how we're going to edit this together. And I kind of went, wow, there's a process here. And if I want to be like a film director, I have to know what all these other people are doing, and I can't piss off the other people in the process. I need to be respectful of what they're doing at the technical level. So very early on, I learned that I had to book the time in the photography studio. I had to build all the stuff. And the people who ran the department were watching me doing all of this and like standing with their cups of coffee, and I'd be going past and they would just think, why won't you just leave the department and go somewhere else? Like, why won't you please go away? And gradually, quietly, when they saw the results, they said, we're going to reach an agreement with you because you're such a pain in the ass. You make your little videos and do your little music thing, and we will leave you alone. And you don't have to do all the other assignments. You just make up your own shit, and we'll pretend that you're in another department, and we'll see you at the end of the 4th year. Like, you can stay here, but we don't want to have to communicate with you. You do your stuff, whatever that weird crap is that you're doing, and we'll like see you at the end of the process. And I'm like, great, freedom, wonderful. And in one of those conversations, somebody said, you are as much of a nuisance as, and then he gave the name of a student who had been in the department a few years previously. And I'd never heard this student's name before. And I said, so what was it that she did that caused you so much trouble? And they said, oh, well, some idiot gave us 2 animation cameras. And I went, pardon? And they said, somebody gave us 2 16mm stop frame animation rostrum cameras. And what would we do with that? We're not an animation department, we're graphic. And I was like, what happened to the cameras? And they went, well, she was interested, so we gave one of them to the Edinburgh College of Art. And I was like, the guys that didn't want me. And we gave the other camera to her. And, oh, she's coming in next week. You can ask her yourself. And I went, there's an animator coming into the department, and you gave her a free camera that I should have access to for making stop motion anime. What is going on? And I thought, well, at least I get to meet an animator. So that was the next part.
Ok, para Fraser aquí lo que nos dijo es que, bueno, él empezó a hacer sus videos, empezó a editarlos y se dio cuenta que la edición no era un proceso muy fácil. Él tenía que ser muy organizado y tener bien enlistado cómo iban sus escenas, cómo iban los cortes para que la gente que iba a editar pudiera editar rápido, ¿no? Entonces él se dio cuenta que era todo un proceso bastante complicado. Entonces, en el departamento de diseño, donde ya no lo querían, donde ya le habían propuesto ya que se largara ya por el amor de Dios, él seguía sin irse. Le dijeron, mira, ¿sabes qué? Como no te vas, tú mira, haz tus videitos con tu camarita, haz lo que tú quieras, te vamos a dar libertad que hagas lo que quieras, solo no nos hables, no nos estés molestando, te vemos en 4 años ya cuando te gradúes, te damos tus papeles y todos felices, todos contentos, ¿no? Y en una de esas conversaciones de rechazo, uno le dijo, tú eres como esta mujer que estuvo hace años aquí, y él dijo, ¿quién? Y le dieron un nombre que él nunca había escuchado, y le dijeron, sí, una que empezó a usar, porque trajeron unas cámaras de animación, porque antes la animación había unas cámaras que tomaban fotos pues de arriba hacia abajo, ¿no? Donde tú ponías dibujitos, tomabas una foto, quitabas un dibujo, ponías el siguiente, tomabas otra foto, quitabas un dibujo, ponías el siguiente, tomabas una foto, y esa era una cámara de animación, y así le dabas vida a los dibujitos que tú habías hecho, ¿no? Entonces que sí, había 2 cámaras, que ella usaba mucho para animación, y ella es una animadora, pues las cámaras nos deshicimos de ellas, una se la dimos al colegio de Edimburgo, a la universidad, que es donde rechazaron a Fraser, y la otra se la regalamos a ella, pero ella va a venir la próxima semana, entonces pues puedes hablar con ella y preguntarle pues qué pasó con esa cámara, ¿no? Y para él era algo muy padre poder conocer a alguien que era un animador. Es la primera vez que iba a conocer a una animadora. Entonces para él fue algo pues muy emocionante. And what happened next?
So I met my first animator. This woman came to the campus the following week, and she announced that she was going to set an animation project for us. And there were 18 students. I was one of 18 students in the graphic design department. And because I was doing all this weird video stuff, they were like, okay, you can kind of come back in and join in with the others and do this project. But she came equipped with only one plastic peg bar and some peg registered paper for 18 of us to share. And I'm like, how is this going to pan out? And then they organized a screening of her work. And it was, I don't want to, people could put 2 and 2 together about who this person was. And I don't want to be denigrating about, let's just say that I was not a fan of her artwork. And I thought, okay, this is not going anywhere. And I thought, I need access to that camera. I need to do this on my own. And I had this massive argument with her in front of everybody. And I just said, I would like the camera back, please, because it's not yours. It was given to the art school. And they gave one to the Edinburgh College of Art, but nobody would let me into the Edinburgh College of Art, and I can't use it. And I don't see any reason why you should have. She said, well, you can come to my house and use it. And I went, no, I'm not going to go to the other side of the city to use something that is mine. They have no right to give that to you. And she screamed at me and called me names and was like, you're such a pain in the ass. I'm like, how long is it going to be before people stop telling me what a pain in the ass I am? I was like, I want to be able to do creative work with the facilities that are supposed to be available to me. And it didn't go anywhere. And then in my final year, in my 4th year of study, after this big argument with her and not getting the animation camera back, the head of the department said, oh, your animator friend is we've asked her to come in 10 times over the course of your final year to help you do some kind of animation project. And I thought, if we try and do this with drawings, this is going to go nowhere because she can't draw. And so I said, well, I don't know how we're going to do this because the camera is in her house. And they went, oh, she's found another camera, a video camera that can do stop motion. And she's going to come in and supervise you doing a little bit of animation. And I thought, okay, well, that sounds really, that sounds good. We had an argument, but okay, she's obviously forgiven me. And I thought the best way to do this is to work in plasticine, because we had a lot of plasticine animation on TV when I was a kid. And I thought I can work out how to do that. And so she appeared with this video camera that was a 1-inch tape format, reel to reel, stop motion, but the camera had been a bank security camera for like 5 years in a bank somewhere in Glasgow. And with the old video technology, the interior of the bank was burned into the retina of the camera. So everything I pointed the camera at had this ghost image of the inside of a Glasgow bank. And I was like, oh man, this is like the worst possible. And then the final part of that chapter, we got a 4th television channel. Miracle, 1982. And this woman was asked by the television channel to make a piece of animation. So the minute they offered her the chance to make some animation, instead of spacing out her visits 10 times in 1 year, she came in 10 times in 2 weeks. And then I came in on the Monday and she disappeared with the video camera as well. And I had no equipment left. I was like, I am never going to get to animate shit at this rate. This is just like, this is never going to work out. So go ahead and translate that part.
Sí, realmente lo que Fraser aquí nos está diciendo es que cuando por fin llegó esta animadora a la escuela, no trajo la cámara. Nada más llegó con hojas para animación y un peg bar, que es una barra donde se ponen las hojas de animación. Y eso lo tenían que compartir entre todos. Entonces él se puso a pelear con ella para que regresara la cámara que la escuela le dio, pero la escuela no tenía por qué darle esa cámara porque eso es para los estudiantes. Entonces se puso a pelear por ella. Ella le dijo, no, vente a mi casa, acá puedes trabajar con la cámara. Le dijo, no, tú tienes que traer la cámara. Total de que nunca la trajo. Al final pues llegaron a un acuerdo donde ella iba a ir 10 veces el último año a la escuela para que pudieran hacer un proyecto de animación. Y llegó con una cámara que era, pues, que sí servía para animación, pero era una cámara que habían estado utilizando varios años en el banco de Glasgow, o sea, en el banco, era una cámara de banco. Entonces cuando tú tomabas una foto con esa cámara, salía como que la imagen ya del banco así se había reflejado, ya que había quedado ya plasmada como que en el vidrio de la cámara. Entonces ya siempre el banco estaba en todo lo que tomaras, era rarísimo. Entonces tampoco pudo trabajar. Y luego esta señora, en vez, la contrataron para hacer una animación en televisión. Entonces lo que hizo, en vez de ir 10 veces durante el año y espaciar sus visitas durante todo el año, en 2 semanas fue las 10 veces que debía de ir y listo. Dejó de ir y se llevó la cámara y se llevó todo. Entonces Fraser se quedó otra vez sin cámara. Dijo, puta, yo nunca voy a animar, nunca voy a ser un animador. Entonces, ¿qué va a pasar conmigo? And what happened next?
So this is the point where things begin to join up almost. She came back and was kind of, I was surprised that she came to find me because I knew that she would know that I would be angry and we'd already had a big row. This makes me sound like a real asshole. I'm not usually, it takes a lot to get me angry. And, you know, I had to summon a lot of courage to be angry at somebody who was, you know, older and more superior, but she was just wrong. And I was right. So I had, you know, summoned the courage to be rude to her once, and she came looking for me, and I thought, that's interesting. And she said, look, if you are serious about this, if you want to work in television or movies, here in Scotland, there's only one way you can do that. And I thought, what do you mean there's only one way? And she said, the trades union that controls the entertainment industry for television, theatre, and cinema is a very, very powerful trades union. And they will only allow 3 new people into the industry each year. And they won't allow anyone in a creative role. So you can't be an art director, you can't be a production designer, you have to choose. You can train to be a camera operator, a sound recordist, or a film editor. And these are the forms that you have to fill in to get an interview to get into the movie industry. And I thought, I'm going to fill in that form. And I'm going to ask, when I graduate from art school, I'm going to ask to be trained as a film editor. The problem was, there's like 5 million people in Scotland in 1983, and there were over 200 people applying for 3 opportunities to get into film and television. Every year, that was the maximum number they would let in. This was a union that was so powerful that you couldn't get the union card if you didn't have experience, and you couldn't get experience if you didn't have a card. And if they discovered that anybody was working on a production without a union ticket, they would shut down the production. It was that aggressive and that hostile. I'm very pro-union, but we had some trades unions in the UK, including the ones in my father's industry, that tried to stop the technology for the digital typesetting. And these unions became very, very powerful and went batshit crazy and created lots of obstacles to development and change and expansion. But I applied and I got in, and I was accepted to be a trainee film editor at the minute I came out of art school. So I went from my graphic design to my work on video to trying to do animation to getting the opportunity to train to be a film editor. And that was what I started doing in 1983.
Entonces en el 83 esta señora le dijo, mira, si tú eres serio acerca de esto, porque bueno, él habló con ella lo contactó raramente a pesar de que ya no eran muy amigos, y le dijo, si tú realmente quieres estar en televisión y cine, tienes que entrar al sindicato. Y la única forma de entrar al sindicato, o sea, no puedes ser director de arte, no puedes tener posiciones importantes, solo puedes ser operador de cámara, sonidista, o sea, como técnico de sonido, o editor de video, nada más. O sea, así puedes entrar y solo aceptan 3 personas al año, una para cada posición, entre 200 aplicantes nada más. Entonces, él se emocionó mucho. La chica esta le dijo, mira, aquí están las formas que tienes que llenar para aplicar. Él aplicó y se quedó. Sorprendentemente, fue aceptado para empezar a trabajar como un trainee en estas áreas, y así comenzó su carrera pues en cine y televisión. And what happened next?
In 1983, our local television news coverage was still filmed on 16mm film, and each broadcasting company had their own film processing laboratory. So I started working on local news, current affairs, documentary, telenovelas on 16mm. And then I got the opportunity in 1985 to move to London to work on a feature film being filmed in 35mm. And it wasn't just an ordinary feature film. It was 6 hours of cinema film time, 2 3-hour movies adapted from a book by Charles Dickens, and the lead actor was Alec Guinness. So for the entire time that we were filming, every morning I had Obi-Wan Kenobi walking through my cutting room with a cup of coffee and a bacon roll. And I thought, I'm on my way to Hollywood. This is great. I've gone from editing local news to working with Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I'm on my way to being successful.
Wow, eso está muy loco. Entonces, o sea, ya estando dentro de la televisión, pues de repente así de la nada, pues lo escogieron para un proyecto en Londres, lo mandaron a Londres, pero así como lo escogieron a él, pudieron haber escogido a cualquiera. Entonces escogieron un grupo de personas, él se fue a Londres y grabaron 2 películas, 2 adaptaciones de novelas de Charles Dickens, 2 películas de 3 horas cada una. Y una de ellas, el actor principal, es el actor que hace de Obi-Wan Kenobi en las películas de Star Wars. Entonces él, pues, obviamente él todavía no hace, no, ya había hecho Star Wars, porque esto fue en los 80s, entonces
1985 nos dijo.
Ajá, en el 85. Entonces, para él era increíble porque pues cada mañana llegaba Obi-Wan con su café y su pan para comer. Entonces, para él fue un gran salto de estar en pequeños proyectos en Escocia a irse a Londres, ya una película pues con actores que ya eran actores ya de Hollywood, ¿no? And what happened next?
We worked on the film for 2.5 years. And when it was released, it was a surprising success. It was made for very little money, and it made a profit in the cinemas, and it was a critical success. And everybody was talking about it because it was so unusual. And I thought, this is great. This is my big break. I'm on the road to being a film director, because lots of people become film directors and they've been film editors. I'd also learned how to edit sound and audio, because the director asked me to do all of the track laying. So I didn't do any of the picture editing, but I did all of the sound editing for 6 hours of cinema screen time. So by the time I finished the movie, I had quite a high level of knowledge and understanding of 35mm film and magnetic tape editing. But the next problem, the entire British film industry collapsed financially. All of the money was just gone. So when I finished work on that movie, I was sending out letters, because you had to mail letters to people to try and get work, or you had to find a phone number and call people up. And nobody wanted to hire me. And I thought, this is ridiculous. And before the internet, the only way you could find out what work was available, London being the center of the television and film industry in the United Kingdom, there was a particular newsagent in the middle of London, and at 6 a.m. every Monday, I would be waiting outside the newsagent when the copies of the Screen International magazine were unloaded. And I would sit in a coffee shop and look at the job advertisements for film editors. And one morning, I got out of my bed, I went up there, I was at 6 o'clock, I sat down in the coffee shop and I opened it up, and there's a picture of Mickey Mouse. And I was like, why is there a picture of Mickey Mouse? And it was an advert, and it said, Walt Disney are looking for exceptionally talented animation personnel to work on a movie combining cartoons and live action. Send your resume and artwork to this address. And I was like, I will sweep the floor to work on that movie, whatever that movie is. So I went straight home and I typed a letter and I put a copy of my resume, but I didn't send them any artwork because I had no animation experience and I had spent 3 years being told how shit my drawing was by all my tutors at art school. So I wrote to them and I said, I really want to work on this film. I'm in London. I'm working in film editing. You may have heard of the movie I've just worked on. Please, can I have a job on your movie? And they didn't answer. So I thought, I am not going to give up. I am not going to stop here. And somehow, from the address, I got on a bus and I went up there and I found what the phone number was. And I called and I said to the receptionist, I sent a letter asking to work on this movie and I haven't had a reply. And she said, oh, hold on, I'm going to connect you to Don. So she put me through to Don Hahn. Now, Don Hahn went on to produce Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, but he was very, very young at the time, and Disney had sent him to London as part of the team to help recruit people for Roger Rabbit. So I found myself talking to this American guy, and he said, well, I'm sorry. Yeah, we didn't reply because he said, hold on. And he got my letter out of the trash can. And he brought it back to the phone and he said, well, you wrote and you wanted to work in the cutting room. And we have a very small cutting room and it's full. We don't need any. And he turned the page to my resume and he went, you spent 4 years at the Glasgow School of Art. Can you draw? And I said, yeah. And he went, why didn't you send us any drawings? And I said, I don't have any animation experience and my tutors. And he went, can I see your drawings? 2 hours after that phone call, the drawings that my tutors spent 3 years telling me were shit got me hired on Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Wow, that's a very crazy story.
Amazing. That's amazing, yeah.
Para resumir lo que Fraser acaba de decirnos, él estaba ya trabajando como editor en grandes películas, pero resulta que de repente la industria del cine en Inglaterra crashó, o sea, colapsó, y él se quedó, pues ya, sin trabajo, entonces empezó a buscar trabajo, entonces el diario, o sea, bueno, cuando llegaba una revista donde él buscaba trabajo, ¿cómo se llamaba esa revista? No me acuerdo, pero
No me
él
acuerdo,
llegaba,
pero ese era el proceso. Tenías que
ajá,
buscarlo en un periódico, una revista, una publicación donde ahí se metían todos las vacantes disponibles para cierta área. Y pues obviamente era pues, para la del cine de animación. Y
ajá,
dice que un
entonces
día de
él llega,
repente, pues llega, abre el periódico, que todas las mañanas y 6 de la mañana se esperaba que llegara el repartidor para poder tener pues, una copia de las publicaciones, y de repente ve un dibujito de Mickey en una de las publicaciones. Dice, ah, chinga, Mickey Mouse, vamos a ver qué dice esto. Y de repente pues ve el anuncio y ve que es para una película, un largometraje, en el que ponía los lineamientos que iban a ser live action, o sea, acción viva con animación. Y ahí tenía los datos, ¿no? Así como, si te interesa, manda tu currículo y tu portafolio de dibujo a tal dirección. Sí, sigue, Rolando.
entonces él agarró, mandó una carta y su currículum, ¿no? Con su experiencia, lo mandó, pero él no mandó ningún dibujo porque dice, pues yo no tengo experiencia en animación y tampoco, pues todos los profesores se la pasan diciéndome que mis dibujos son una mierda, ¿no? Is that the thing you
I
saw on
still
the
have it.
paper? Oh, él todavía tiene ahí el anuncio que vio donde Walt Disney estaba contratando gente.
Oh,
Entonces, él mandó su carta, o sea, con su currículum, y no le contestaron. Pero él dijo, yo no me voy a rendir. Entonces, él buscó el número de teléfono de donde se habían o sea, donde habían puesto ese anuncio, marcó y pues le contestó a alguien en Estados Unidos, un americano, que le dijo, no, o sea, sacó su carta de la basura y leyó que él había aplicado pues para estar en el cuarto de editores y le dijo, no, pues es que editores ya tenemos los que necesitamos, es un cuarto de editores muy pequeño, no necesitamos más. Cambiaron la hoja o sea, la página de su carta y vieron que él había estudiado en la Escuela de Arte de Glasgow. Y le dijeron, oye, pero tú eres un artista, ¿sabes dibujar? Y él le dijo, sí. ¿Y por qué no nos mandaste dibujos entonces? Y dijo, bueno, es que pues yo no tengo experiencia en animación y los profesores se la pasan diciendo que mis dibujos son una porquería, ¿no? Entonces dice que él, o sea, 2 horas después, o sea, él envió todo, o sea, todos sus dibujos, los mandó, los enseñó, los dibujos que le habían dicho que son una porquería, y ahí la gente de Disney le dijo, pues está perfecto. Y con esos dibujos lo contrataron para trabajar en la película de Quién engañó a Roger Rabbit, que si no lo han visto es una obra maestra. Es del director Robert Zemeckis, el mismo que dirigió Volver al Futuro. Entonces vayan a ver Who Framed Roger Rabbit, es una gran película y lo contrataron y ese fue su primer trabajo en animación. Also Fraser, we have been talking for 2 hours. I want to propose something.
I only just got into the animation industry after 2 hours.
I know. So I want to propose something because also
For
here
sure.
is late, so I'm not letting the people I live with get sleep. So I want to propose something. I don't know if you would like to continue this conversation
I'd be very happy
next
to.
week,
I'd be very
same
happy
time.
to.
What do you think about that?
Next week, I will be in Ciudad de Mexico for 1 week doing my first in-person classes since the pandemic. But the following week, we could do it the following week if that's okay with you guys.
Okay, let's do it in 2 weeks.
yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
We will have part 2 of this fantastic story because I'm very into it now.
The one
I'm
thing
really enjoying it.
before we leave, and I'm sorry for keeping your housemates out of their bed, but a lot of the people that I work with, the students here in Mexico, I wouldn't want to say, oh, you know, it was so terribly difficult in my time, and things are much easier for you. They're not easier. They're different. So the thing that I would always want to encourage people, don't give up. There have been very few points in my working life where I've been doing exactly the job that I wanted to do or the job that I expected to do. But every time somebody gave me the opportunity to do something that was moving in the right direction, I took it. And sometimes it didn't even look like I was moving in the right direction. I never believed, once I was in film editing, that I would have any way of reconnecting my love of drawing with my love of movie making. And then on the morning of 27th July 1987, I bought this and it changed my life. But the reason it changed my life was I didn't give up with the drawing. I didn't give up with even when people were telling me that they thought I was wasting my time, and they thought, I had a strong feeling inside that what had been true for Diego Velázquez was still true for me. And it's still true today. It doesn't matter. And all of these people getting so worried about AI and artificial intelligence and it's going to steal our jobs. No, it's not. I've lived through it repeatedly. That's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to take that as a challenge and you're going to get even better to the point where the computers can't catch up with you. Because even after all these years, the people that make the most use of the computers and all of that technology still have to know how to draw, because what matters is observation. And it's really easy to get caught up in all of this anxiety about what's going to happen to the animation industry. You're going to happen to the animation industry. You, not the machines, not the technology, not the money, not anything. It's about people. And it's about whether or not you give a damn about the stories that you tell and the images that you create. And the world is not divided into people who can draw and people who can't draw. It's divided into people who do draw and people who don't draw. And if you want to get really good at something, just spend the hours. And the other thing I would say is, if you want to do really good work in any area of animation, switch this the fuck off and leave it in a drawer. If you want to get good, you can't be having this thing go bzzz, 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 Instagram, bzzz, Facebook, bzzz, LinkedIn, bzzz, whatever, Discord. Switch it off and concentrate on what you're doing. Switch it off and go out of the house without your phone and live and capture what you see in your sketchbook. But keep a sketchbook, not a copybook. I open up sketchbook after sketchbook and it's not a sketchbook. It's a copy of manga, it's a copy of anime, it's a copy of BoJack Horseman, it's a copy of Disney. I want to see your drawings of your neighborhood and your friends and your family, because I have seen Tokyo, I've seen New York, and I've seen every conceivable big-eyed, pointy-chinned Japanese schoolgirl. I came to Mexico to see images of Mexico. And I am so lucky to be here. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be living and working here. And I would love to encourage people to celebrate and capture and enjoy the world that you're part of, and do that by observing it and drawing it. That would be my last bit of advice.
Wow, un gran consejo. Básicamente lo que Fraser nos dice es, pues, no se rindan a pesar de lo que les digan y les digan y les digan. Sigan adelante, sigan con lo que les apasiona. Si quieren ser animadores, sigan dibujando y dibujando a pesar de lo que les digan. Esta época, pues, él no quiere decir que sea más fácil que antes o más difícil, simplemente es diferente. La gente está preocupado por la inteligencia artificial va a quitarle el trabajo a los artistas, y en verdad eso no va a pasar. Tenemos que adaptarnos, y las computadoras hacen que nos volvamos mejores, porque sin importar qué tanto sepas usar la computadora, tienes que saber dibujar sí o sí. Y realmente la computación o la tecnología no es algo que le está sucediendo a la industria de la animación, más bien nosotros somos lo que le tenemos que suceder a la industria de la animación, no la tecnología, y tenemos que adaptarnos y mejorar dentro de de este mundo, y si queremos mejorar en algo, dibujando, escribiendo, lo que sea, hay que apagar el teléfono un rato, hay que meterlo en el cajón, no podemos estar dibujando, escribiendo, haciendo nuestras artes, ser buenos en algo, si tenemos todo el tiempo el teléfono vibrando con Facebook, notificaciones de WhatsApp, notificaciones de Instagram, o sea, de todo eso. Apaguemos el teléfono un rato, salgamos a la calle, dibujemos, agarremos nuestro cuaderno de dibujo y nos pongamos a dibujar lo que vemos. No hay que dibujar, o sea, copias de lo que hace Disney, copias de anime, copias de etcétera. No, sal y dibuja a tus vecinos, dibuja a tu vecindario, dibuja tu colonia, los edificios que ves alrededor, la naturaleza que ves alrededor. Él ha viajado por muchos lados, por Tokio, muchísimos países, para poder ir y dibujar lo que ve. Y ahorita pues Fraser está en México y está muy feliz de poder dibujar lo que hay en México. Y bueno, la próxima semana vamos a tener un episodio normal del Cine se fue a la mierda, pero dentro de 15 días vamos a tener la segunda parte de esta entrevista para que Fraser nos termine de contar su historia, porque nos quedamos apenas en cómo entró a su primer trabajo de animación en la película de Who Framed Roger Rabbit, ¿no? Donde el director de animación fue Richard Williams, gran leyenda de la animación, y el director Robert Zemeckis, ¿no? El director de Volver al Futuro. Entonces, ¿qué más puede pedir uno para su primer trabajo en industria ya del cine mainstream? Bueno, no su primero, pero que trabajo como animador, ¿no? Entonces, pues muchas gracias por habernos acompañado el día de hoy, por estar con nosotros. Nos vemos la próxima semanita, y dentro de 15 días volvemos a tener a Fraser aquí para la segunda parte de esta bonita historia. Y también para que sigan a Fraser, aquí mismo está el enlace de los enlaces en la descripción del video, los enlaces de su Facebook, de su Instagram, su LinkedIn, está su página de IMDb para que conozcan un poco más de su historia y su carrera. Él ha trabajado en Space Jam, Tarzán, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, en diferentes películas. Entonces vayan y miren un poquito, e investiguen un poquito de él, mucha información sobre Fraser allá afuera en el internet. Y pues muchísimas gracias, Fraser, una vez más. Fue
Gracias,
un honor
Rolando.
tenerte
Gracias,
aquí.
Mace. Gracias a todos. Gracias por invitarme. Y soy muy, muy afortunado vivir y trabajar aquí en México. Hay mucho talento, mucho potencial, y es una gran oportunidad para mí. Y espero que este año puedo mejorar mi español. Pero gracias por traducir y gracias por su paciencia.
No, gracias a ti, Fraser. ¿Algo que quieras decir, Mace, antes de que nos vayamos?
Sí, nada más pues recuerden también, no les cuesta nada si les gusta el contenido, obviamente si les gusta la historia de nuestro invitado, un pulgarcito arriba, si se quieren suscribir, también le hace bien al canal, y pues también agradecer mucho a nuestro invitado Fraser. Thank you so very much for being with us today, and thank you for letting us have a part 2 2 weeks from now. We're gonna be expecting it, and we leave a very nice cliffhanger right now.
Cool. Gracias.
Ok, muchas gracias. Cuídense mucho, por favor, y recuerden, vean mucho cine, muchas películas. Hasta luego, por favor.